Please be seated. I know we have some teachers in the room, and at least one other preacher besides myself. Every teacher and preacher knows that some lessons' illustrations work better than others. Isn't that right? You know, sometimes you come up with what you think is a good illustration of the point you want to make, and your listeners get something entirely different, or they just don't get it at all. You know, even Jesus had some parables that worked better than others. And I submit that today's is one of the somewhat less successful illustrations of Jesus' teaching. Modern commentators theorize that perhaps Luke, sort of putting together all of the sayings that he remembers or has been told that Jesus said, sort of mushed some things together that didn't entirely make sense. Because if you read this literally, is Jesus telling us that we should steal money so we can give it away to people so that they'll be nice to us? Really? Now, the ancient commentators didn't seem to have the same problem with this. They didn't pay a lot of attention to this parable, but they sort of took the moral to be generous. It goes along with the parable that comes after it in Luke, which is the Lazarus and the stingy rich man, and perhaps with the one that comes before it of the prodigal son, and how love overrides desire for keeping goods. So John Chrysostom, for example, who was Bishop of Constantinople in the 5th century, referenced this as just sort of be generous to everyone. I wonder whether maybe one reason why the ancient fathers of the church had less trouble with this than modern commentators do is that they had a more holistic understanding of the role of a manager. That perhaps in ancient times, it was part of a manager's job, part of a steward's job, to also take care of the patronage of his master. Because it was a patronage society in which part of what a rich man was supposed to do was be generous to other people, who in turn would then give him honor. Perhaps we could understand this a little better if we thought of, for example, the manager of a local car dealership, who, as part of his job, sponsors the local Little League team. That's not immediately making money for the car dealership, is it? But it would be a very foolish owner of that car dealership to object to that, because you're getting goodwill, you're getting name recognition, you're doing what a local business is supposed to do in the community. You're not being Scrooge-like. Or think, for example, of a farmer who takes some part of his or her crops and gives it to the food bank. It's not immediately making money, but if the farm was actually owned by an absentee landlord, would they not consider that part of the job of the farm manager to help the community? Or think of a woodland owner who sets aside a part of the land for wildlife, food, and habitat, or protects the riverbanks for the salmon. Is this not part of the job of managing? So perhaps the job of the steward in Jesus' little story includes some acts of charity. And perhaps the master's approval is partly admiring the shrewdness of this man in preparing for his future, but also that, you know, he's now being lauded as a generous man in the community. He's accruing honor, even if he is losing some money. Another piece that I think helps us understand this parable a little better is Jesus' reference to dishonest wealth. You have to understand that for Jesus, all wealth is dishonest. There is no honest wealth. All wealth is at the expense of other people. Jesus lived in an agrarian economy. There wasn't a stock market magically generating wealth. There's land. It produces food. If I keep more food than I actually can eat and need, it means that other people have less food than they actually need and can eat. So when Jesus talks about, you know, how you use dishonest wealth, he's not talking about wealth that is particularly dishonest in the sense of someone has gone and robbed a bank. He's talking about wealth. And another piece is it's very consistent in all of Scripture that all of us are simply stewards for God. The earth and all that is in it belongs to the Lord. And we simply are the temporary managers. And one day we will lose that because we will die. So when Jesus is talking about how the steward, knowing that he is not going to be steward forever, is generous to others, he's really talking about all of us. All of us are stewards, temporary managers of whatever power and wealth we have in this world. The land we own, we're not really owners, we're stewards, temporary managers. Our bank accounts, we think we own it, but we are temporary stewards. As they say, you can't take it with you. How do we use these riches that are temporarily entrusted to us? How generous are we with them? Jesus encourages us to, in our use of what we think we own, to be mindful that we are simply stewards for God, and that other people's needs, other creatures' needs, are, as hard as it is to believe, as important as ours. And if we want to be in the eternal realm, we better get used to that, because that's what God does. God generously gives. Jesus generously gave, knowing that he was on his way to Jerusalem, where his life would be taken. He was profligate in his teaching, in his healing, in his feeding. He invites us to follow his example in being generous with what we have now, knowing that our possession is simply temporary.